Many of us who know General Jordan well have looked forward to this occasion when we'll have the opportunity to hear from him. Introducing this man is a challenge because we could be here 15, 20 minutes just listening to the introduction, so I won't do it justice, but I will select those parts that are most meaningful to me. Amos Jordan served as President and CEO of the Center for Strategic and International Studies with the acronym CSIS in Washington, D.C. from 1983 to 1988, and as President of the Pacific Forum CSIS from 1999 to 1994. He currently serves as a Trustee Emeritus at CSIS. He has held many positions in the military and in government, and also has a long history of church service. Dr. Jordan has held positions of Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, Deputy Undersecretary of State and Acting Undersecretary of State for Security Assistance, among other positions in government. He is a former U.S. Army Brigadier General. He had a distinguished career on the faculty of the United States Military Academy at West Point, as part of which he became chair of social sciences there, which is a very prestigious position. I was talking to his daughter at dinner today and was reminded, she and her husband at dinner, and was reminded of his choice he made to become a teacher, because he knew of the importance, he felt the importance and appreciated the importance of educating young minds. And the list of young leaders who he has had a chance to influence in that capacity is very illustrious, including people like General Petraeus, General Abizaid, and many others whose names you would recognize. Following his career at the U.S. Military Academy, he served, as we've mentioned, at CSIS and in government positions. He served as a member of President George H.W. Bush's Intelligence Oversight Board. It was pointed out to me at one point that General Jordan has done a special assignment for every president of the United States from Harry Truman through George W. Bush. And that is a mark of distinction and an indication of how much respect he has had. He is a graduate of the United States Military Academy and of Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He earned a doctorate in international affairs from Columbia University and is the lead author of a textbook in foreign affairs, which is now just recently, about 6 or 8 months ago, has come out in a 6th edition. There aren't very many textbooks that come out in 6 editions, and so that's another mark of his scholarly ability. Since 2008, he's been a senior fellow in international affairs at the Wheatley Institution, during which he has overseen the establishment of the Distinguished Lecture Series in International Affairs, at which he will be the honored speaker this evening, and also the Wheatley International Affairs Student Conference. On a personal level, I get to say I've come to love this man. We live in an institution where you can say that with a straight face and mean every word of it. I am a better person, a better man, better in every way from the privilege I've had of associating with Amos Jordan. We're pleased to have him speak to us this evening, and his talk is fairly intergenerational. Has America lost its mojo? The changing nature of power in the contemporary world. General Jordan.
Thank you, Richard. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Can you hear me back there in the back? Nobody jumped up, so I'm not sure. Well, I come to you with considerable humility in light of the title that I've given this talk, not necessarily the Mojo part, but the analysis of the power situation in the world and how it's changing. I think that the most essential point is that we have been the crucial factor, the crucial actor in the maintenance, in the building and the maintenance of the international system from which we, the United States, have greatly profited, as has the rest of the world. But that strength and that legacy is in some danger, as we ourselves have considerably diminished power now at home and abroad. I think it's useful to start out by defining national power. It is the ability a state has to induce others to do things that they would not do of their own volition. We have a recalcitrant world in which 180 some nations each has its own agenda, its own values they're trying to protect and advance. And the consequence is that absent an overarching international structure, chaos would be the result. Now, when we talk about national power, we can readily divide it into hard power and soft power. Soft power is the ability to induce others to do things without the threat or the use of coercion. And you see the relationship of that to Mojo, because Mojo, as I understand it, is the ability through our style, our liveliness, our values, to get others to follow us. They're attracted to us. They want to identify with us. Now, you may have your own definition of Mojo, but that's the one I'll take. And that is the essence of soft power. Soft power is hard to obtain and easy to squander. We have obtained it. We're in danger of squandering it. Hard power, on the other hand, derives directly from military and economic strength. And we have had, and do have continually and continuously, extraordinary amount of hard power. Our economy is the largest in the world. We grow it at about 2.5% and 3% annually, maybe a little more. In most times, we're not now, of course, doing that, but I presume after the recession we'll resume that trend line. Now, of course, although that's an important trajectory that we're on, you have to realize that China has been increasing its GNP by about 9 or 10% a year. India, the other Asian giant, has been increasing its economic strength somewhat slower, 7 or 8%. But they both dwarf ours in terms of trend. And probably within this decade, China, in fact, is going to become the world's #1 economic power. Now, the Chinese are difficult to deal with. They have a habit of extracting the maximum and giving the least. And other nations, as a consequence, are a little leery of dealing with them, but they really have no option because China is such a towering economic power. It's the principal source of imports from most of the rest of Asia. And of course, the 40% of our national spending that we borrow is mostly supplied by China. It's a bit anomalous that the world's richest power is drawing such enormous resources from one of the poorer of the nations. Now, national power, of course, is a relative concept. Indeed, power itself is a relative concept. It's a two-handed concept. You know, it's power vis-a-vis someone else. It makes no sense to think of power in unilateral terms. The Arabs have a proverb about one hand cannot applaud. And that's exactly right. This is a two-handed concept, and we have to recognize that everything we do is in relation to what others do. In the case of China, they have been on such a strong trajectory that people tend to think that they're going to take over the world. But China has many problems. They cannot maintain that dazzling growth rate as their economy matures. And they have many problems, political, particularly demographic, and environmentally. And all of these, while they may not slow China down very much right now, will certainly do so over the medium and longer term ahead. Now, power, power is essentially a subjective concept as well as a relative concept. As Thomas Hobbes put it many years ago, power is what people think it is until it is tested. Now, Saddam Hussein tried to exploit this subjective nature of power by letting his neighbors, particularly the Iranians, know that he had these large stores of weapons of mass destruction. The problem is that while he was convincing his neighbors, he also convinced the West, and that led to his to the invasion and the overthrow of Saddam. Excuse me. When we try to talk about military power, military strength, we get into the problem of the difficulty of measurement. There are some things you can quantify, but internal cohesion, morale, access to resources, including energy, all of these things are difficult for us to get a handle on as we try to gauge another's power. One of the crucial elements of a power calculus is the place of nuclears. Nuclear adds a whole new dimension to power calculations. If you reflect on it, the nuclear power, the ability to make nuclear weapons, profoundly influences a region where one state has this ability and others do not. But it also impacts the international balance of power. The fact that Iran is clearly, I think it's right to say clearly, trying to develop a nuclear weapon, that's the opinion of most of the experts, means not only does it threatens Israel's very existence, and Ahmadinejad has made it plain that he doesn't believe Israel should exist, but it also influences the whole regional balance of power. The Saudis, who are the natural antipode of the Iranians, the Saudis may be induced to acquire a nuclear weapon. As you know, Pakistan has sold nuclear technology. The AQ-CAN network, which helped Gaddafi start a nuclear program and helped the Syrians start a nuclear program. The Pakistanis are a substantial nuclear power in their own right, but they're also a very shaky state. A failing state, I think, is probably not too strong a term to use. And what if this nation's nuclear weapons falls into terrorists' hands, which is the real danger of nuclear proliferation? If the terrorists and Al-Qaeda has made it plain that it intends to get nuclear weapons and it will use them if it does, Al-Qaeda has made that plain. You can see what a nightmare is out there if the international system is not able to contain the nuclear proliferation danger. Now, if we think about the qualities of military strength, the elements of military strength, it's plain that the world really has a superpower and a number of regional powers. This is the way the Chinese characterize the international system, which they want to change into a multipolar system in which they're one of the poles and not just a regional pole. This system, international system, is prone to fragility because different states advance economically, politically, militarily at different rates. And so that there's a constant shifting of power balances. And in fact, this characterizes the international system, that it's in constant flux. And if we are not alert, if we do not wisely use our military strength through our alliances or otherwise, it can have a destabilizing effect. Let me talk for just a moment about power calculus. Every state in our international system, in which there's no sovereign over all the sovereign states, and which there are no agreed processes for coping with shifting power balances, it's essentially a dog-eat-dog world. Every nation has to be on the alert as to how its neighbors stand, what its relationships are, whether it can be strengthened through an alliance. And alliances, of course, are and always have been a feature, all the way back to Athens and Sparta, been a feature of the international system as states seek to augment their power and to spread the costs of sustaining that power. Every leader of a state has to ask himself if he can, in fact, initiate an alliance, strengthen an alliance, because the alliances, which, as I mentioned, go back eons, the alliances give him or his state the ability to operate in a way that he couldn't before. Our most powerful alliance, of course, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. And as you're aware, NATO, despite the fact that it was created to deal with a Soviet Union that no longer exists, is still a very important alliance. Its lead in the Libyan venture, for instance, was crucial. And although I might disagree with Mr. Obama on many things, I think getting NATO up front in this case in Libya, which some people have criticized the president for leading from behind, I think was exactly right. Now, we tend to measure military power not only by what we see it accomplishes, but what it could accomplish if conflict should break out. If you, for the moment, think about China, not that I think China is necessarily a menace to us, or that we're doomed to confrontation with China. That relationship is still to be worked out. It is a work in progress. But if there were to be a confrontation with China, which could occur over Taiwan, for instance, where we had a showdown as recently as 1996, when it looked like China was about to invade Taiwan, and we sent carriers into the Taiwan Straits to forestall that. They are keen to push us out of our forward position in Asia, East Asia. They are building a missile capacity to force our carriers too far out to sea for the jets there to be able to intervene. Although, of course, we do have the capability to put submarines in there with submarine-launched missiles that can easily cope with the range that they're trying to push us out of. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, the state that threatens Israel is clearly Iran. And Iran is not just a threat in the region, but by their irresponsibility, such as this plot we've uncovered, to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C., in a crowded restaurant with dozens and perhaps more American casualties. The Iranians are not just a threat to the region, which the Saudis and others are trying to counteract, but they're a threat to the whole international system. Now, to forestall the Iranian threat, persuade the Saudis and others that they don't have to build or acquire nuclear weapons of their own, we have the option of extending our nuclear umbrella over them. Now, that nuclear umbrella, which is sometimes referred to as extended deterrence, that nuclear umbrella already shields our allies in Eastern Asia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. And the question is whether it's wise to extend it on into the Middle East. The problem is as Iran acquires nuclear weapons and maintains its aggressiveness, we may have to call on that deterrent. And that is a very sobering thought indeed. Extended deterrence is a boomerang that we can't let go of. We're doomed, if you will, to live with it and the dangers that entails into the indefinite future. Now, we have to recognize, as we assess a military balance, that the resources that states can bring to bear in these cases very widely, not only in quantity but in quality. And some states can make a great deal more out of the resources available than others. And Israel is a case in point there, because despite the fact that it's tiny in both land area and population, it's been able to marshal its resources to the point that it's defeated much larger surrounding Arab states' armed forces in several wars. Our aim must be to Israelize ourselves, to make the most out of the resources which are unquestionably going to dwindle. Almost all of the plans I hear about to cope with our deficit and debt problems entail some cuts in the defense establishment. Now, Secretary Gates, before he retired, had made serious cuts in the defense budget. And the new Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, a former head of the Office of Management and Budget, is going to be equally avid in seeking to squeeze down that defense budget. But unless we cut our commitments substantially, we run grave risks of a mismatch between commitments and resources. Our men and women in the armed forces are already going back to Afghanistan and to Iraq several times. It was extraordinarily hard, of course, not only on them, but on their families as well. Now, excuse me. When we reflect on the challenges immediately ahead of us and what we need to do to meet those, I think it's clear that the first thing we need to do is to put our house in order. It's interesting that when General Abizaid was here and he listed the things that needed to be done, he listed getting our economic situation in hand. I expect him to talk about Sunni extremism and Shia extremism and dependence on Middle Eastern oil, all of which he did. But I was surprised to hear him zero on this as a major challenge, international challenge to us. We need to go beyond, of course, getting our house in order. In order to maintain our soft power, our mojo, we have to learn to listen to others. We have become accustomed as a nation, because we were in fact the leaders of the free world, the guarantors of the international system, the people, the entity on whom others depended for their security, whether they be Saudis or Germans or Japanese or whoever. We got used to the idea that what we said went. This is, of course, underscored by the firmly held view of the exceptionalism of the United States. But in the kind of world that we have, where power is diffusing, particularly soft power is diffusing, we need to learn to listen and recognize that there are other perspectives, other needs, other priorities on the part of the other states. We have a tendency to, let's say, vigorous internationalism. If there's something wrong out there, if there's a problem out there, we're going to go fix it. The world is a little too chaotic, and our resources are too limited for us to get out there and fix everything. We've got to learn to be less inclined that way. I think if you read Alma 48, you'll find there is this caution to not be on the offensive, and which is, incidentally, is a key teaching of the Quran. The Quran teaches that the faithful are to be willing to take up arms and fight only if they're being oppressed, never on the offensive. And that's a lesson that we need to internalize. We also need to understand that no matter what our priorities are, our first priority is a viable United States. On the strength of our economy depends our role in the world, the extent to which we can exercise our soft power, the extent to which we can develop military power. It's the root of everything we do, and yet we seem to be incapable, our political system seems to be incapable of coping with our deficits and our debt. So I think there's a challenge that all of us can set for ourselves, is to be well-informed and active participants in the political process and bring this nation back to reality. And I leave that challenge with you. And I'm ready to answer your questions. I answered every possible question in your mind.
Cadet James Clough. I'm a graduate student here at Brigham Young University. I'm working on language acquisition and teaching with a Chinese emphasis. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to hear your words on things. I noticed in some of the comments given to us online about your history and whatnot that you've worked with the president and other folks a little bit on intelligence oversight. And I was just curious how attentive our nation's leaders tend to be, in your opinion, to the oversight that folks such as yourself who work in think tanks and whatnot have on what kind of influence, I guess, you feel like those folks have on our nation's presidents and leaders of that sort. Does that make sense?
I'm not 100% sure that I understand your question, but I'll take a stab at what I think it is. The intelligence community has to answer to the Congress. One of the problems is, in fact, that it has to respond to about 8 different committees of the Congress. It also has to, of course, coordinate with and be responsive to the interagency process represented by the National Security Council. It also has a very strong tradition of self-criticism. There's a strong tendency in the agency to check and double-check all of their estimates. For many years, I was part of a small group that met in Princeton for 2 or 3 days, twice a year, to go over the national intelligence estimates when they were still in draft. And that taught me a good deal about the intelligence community, but it also taught me how critical of themselves the intelligence professionals are. So I'm not worried about the intelligence community zipping off on its own, nor am I worried about it being subservient to the political winds that are blowing. Does that answer your question?
I think it does, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
General Jordan, thank you for your time tonight. My name is Alan Taylor. I'm a geography major with an emphasis in geospatial intelligence. And my question is more relating to our role in the national security apparatus.
Just a little louder, please.
Certainly, I'll do my best. Many of us here tonight are probably going to be involved in some part of national security. Many of us either as soldiers or as people in the more political side of things. Mm-hmm. Many of us are not going to have the same influence that you do right off the bat. What can we do as sort of at an entry-level position to have influence to bring our house in order?
Well, the first thing an aspiring professional needs to do is to master his brief. You have got to become a solid student of a situation. Otherwise, you might as well become a politician. We have the opportunity in this country because intelligence is a natural magnet for intelligent people. We have the opportunity to draw the best minds into our intelligence system. And in fact, from my experience with the intelligence system, they are extraordinary people, both on the analytical side and on the operational side. So the first thing to do is, in fact, to get yourself a solid grounding. The second thing I would suggest is that you go to graduate school, and if you don't study international politics, at least give international politics real attention, no matter what you're majoring in. Because it's only if you understand the context in which events are occurring that you can make an accurate judgment about what needs to be done and what role you can play. So those would be my two basic responses to you. Yeah.
My name is Cadet Johnson, or Cadet Eric Johnson. I'm a political science major here at BYU. And my question, sir, is you made the statement that America cannot go and solve all the world's problems.
Yeah.
My question would be then, what is your criteria on U.S. intervention in foreign countries, and does the recent deployment of special operations soldiers in Africa meet your requirement?
First of all, let me say I've been astonished by the president's sending that handful of soldiers into Africa. I don't understand that at all. The problems in Africa are overwhelming, and they're not susceptible to military solutions. And what kind of aberration occurred, or what they were smoking or drinking in the White House, I don't know. But that aside, there is the question of when is American intervention or involvement in a foreign venture justified or called for. And the first and most important criteria is what impact does this country, this situation, have on America's vital national interests? If you can't define that, if you can't pin that, then get out of there. Don't get into it if it's not engaging our vital interests. Now, these vital interests come in a variety. They might be national security interests. They might be trade interests. They might be investment interests. In rare cases, I would say even humanitarian interests. But unless you can pin a vital interest there, you have no business getting in at all. And secondly, are the tools that you have available likely to make a real contribution to resolving the problem or the issue? As I indicated with my skepticism about the African venture, I don't think that sending American troops in there makes any sense at all, because the problem is not one that the military can deal with. It's military strength in those circumstances is largely irrelevant. So you have to have a vital national interest, you have to have the tools that will deal with the issue, and you have to be able to do it at a cost that is bearable. Now, we're already bearing tremendous costs of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We don't need to take on a third venture. The people who are calling for us to do something decisive about Iran, and that usually implies some military action, need to think about the full consequences of that, not only in what the Iranian reaction will be and the regional reaction will be, but what the costs will be. And we don't need to slight that part of the analysis, because rich as we are, strong as we are, there are limits, especially in these days of debt and deficits. Okay?
Good evening, sir. My name is Brian Lewis. I'm an undergraduate studying international relations. You mentioned our role engaging NATO in Libya, and I was just curious what you believe is the ideal role for the United States to play as Libya seeks a new government. And secondly,
Role we should play now with the interim government?
yes.
Uh-huh.
And secondly, what the United States should be, or how we should be approaching Kim Jong-il's desire for talks to give up nuclear weapons for economic aid.
Well, on the first point, I think that we had the right approach in Libya, that the French and the British were prepared to go forward and then to shift it into NATO hands. And we were able, in fact, we had to, because the French and British have squeezed their defense budgets down to the point that they ran out of munitions. After 10 or 11 days, we had to provide them munitions. We played a vital role in preventing, along with in accord with the United Nations resolution, in preventing Gaddafi from really smashing his own people down. So the case of Libya, I think, is a case of where we used our power carefully and well. Now, repeat for me the second question.
What the United States should be doing about Kim Jong-il's offer to talk about giving up nuclear weapons in exchange for economic aid, and whether or not we should take that as a credible offer.
Well, I was not aware of that offer. Is that something that's just happened?
I read it this morning in the New York Times.
You read it just today, yeah. I was not aware of any explicit offer. First of all, we have learned that if the North Korean leadership states something, you can be quite sure the opposite is true. I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw Kim Jong-il, who's definitely overweight. He has been able, curiously enough, to manipulate the Chinese into a constant stream of food and energy aid. He's able to do this because the Chinese fear that a collapsing North Korea would send hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of refugees streaming across that common border. And so he's played that card very well. He's also periodically telling us he's prepared to return to the so-called six-power talks. But he's not done so. He just keeps selling us that bill of goods over and over, and we don't get anything for it. So my reaction to any offer that he makes about his nuclear program and aid, I wouldn't take very seriously. It doesn't hurt to talk to him, but you have to go into the talks realizing that you're being manipulated, or he's trying to manipulate you. He has no intention whatsoever of giving up those nuclear weapons, none at all. He views that as his ability to be the major power in Northeast Asia instead of Japan, and to have an influence in the world far beyond what that miserable little country would warrant.
Thank you.
Preston Taylor I'm an economics major here at BYU. Mm-hmm. What role has your understanding of the restored gospel in the Book of Mormon played in your approach to the international system, analyzing it and the conclusions that you come to? And if so, how?
Well, it's a tough question. The Book of Mormon does, of course, as I mentioned earlier, teach that we should be on the defensive, not the offensive. And that's a very sound rule in international politics. It also teaches us to take care of the needy. And in our international system, we have hundreds of millions of needy. So that one of the things we should be doing, and to some degree are already doing, is helping these nations in the developing world to begin to grow, to begin to meet the needs of their people. We have not done as good a job of that. It's a very tough job. I've been engaged in it in one way or another for many years, and there have been innumerable efforts to by outsiders to try to lift these developing nations out of poverty. A testimony to that is the number of tube wells, for instance, across the Middle East and North Africa that are not producing water. I recall one villager was asked why this well that he was standing over was not producing, and he said, well, we're waiting for the Americans to come and fix it. Well, that, of course, is exactly the wrong kind of situation that we want to be in, that we have ownership rather than they have ownership of these poverty alleviation programs. We're learning how to do that, but it is a really tough job, and as the Book of Mormon tells us, no matter how difficult, we have to persist. Okay? One more question.
Evening, sir. I'm Cadet Joshua Sharp from Utah Valley University. I am a philosophy major. I'll be graduating in April. I just wanted to ask a quick question. When you stated that our priorities need to be putting our house in order, and our first priority needs to be a viable United States. And so my question for you is regarding a little bit more into our current interventionist policy and the seeming policies that we've had since World War II. Do you feel that in order to reach those goals of putting our house in order and making us the first priority, that we need to return to an isolationist policy from pre-World War II, or find some happy medium between that and now?
Well, clearly, resorting to an isolationist policy would be a grievous mistake. We cannot turn back that clock. I would not say that we have to walk back very far from our current liberal interventionist impulses. We do need to be more selective. We do need to lean more on our allies. You know, NATO has not only been very helpful in Libya, but in Afghanistan. And that alliance we need to exploit to the fullness. But I think it's entirely feasible if we put our foreign interventions into the context I was just talking about, that in fact there's a real national interest involved, and it's something that we can really contribute to resolving. I think if we use those two criteria, that'll move us back away from what I take to be, and I gather from your question, you probably take to be too much involved in pressing the international system for our way of life, our way of doing. We have to be modest because our resources are not unlimited, and we need to parse those out very carefully. Thank you.